and welcome to HardwareCon Venture Capital, Trends and Opportunities in the New Decade. My name is Lila Taylor. I'm the CBO of Demi Colton, an organization that produces highly specialized, targeted investor and business development conferences and virtual events for the life science, med tech, and digital health industry. I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves and also talk about the one item of hardware that helped them get through lockdown. I'm going to go ahead and kick off with what helped me. This is the Enso, a very compact TENS device, which is wonderful if you have sports injuries for non-opioid pain relief. I'm going to turn it over to Chrissy now to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Chrissy Meyer. I'm a partner at a firm called Root Ventures. We do seed stage investments. So we're basically writing like $1 to $2 million checks into companies that have deeply technical founders and are solving deeply technical problems. So that includes everything from pizza making robots to machine learning for manufacturing lines to AI for fertility treatments. We've kind of invested in, across the board in a broad spectrum of deeply technical things. Before joining Root, I was an operator. So I was always on the hardware and manufacturing side. I shipped several iPods. I worked on the first Apple Watch, the Square credit card reader, before jumping to early stage startups. To answer the question about my favorite hardware product at the moment that helped me get through the last year, I'm going to go with the Level Lock. I feel like there are a lot of smart locks out there. I've seen quite a few pitches for some, but this is the first one that I've been legitimately excited about. It just replaces the deadbolt in your door. So from the outside or from the inside, you can't tell it's a smart lock. And Root Ventures did not invest in Level, so there is no investor bias here whatsoever. I just really like the product as a customer.
Wow, Chrissy, I want to hear more about that as well. I'm going to move to Kelly.
Great. Hi, I'm Kelly Coyne. I am founder and managing partner at Grit Ventures. We invest in extremely early stage, deep tech hardware and robotics products, and we specialize in B2B. And like Chrissy, I grew up on the operator side of the house, but unlike her, I actually focused on commercialization and go-to-market as my specialty. So I think that both of us bring that to the way that we look at venture capital, and it's really excited to be on a panel with her for that reason. My favorite product that I think got me through is actually I had a baby during lockdown. And so the Owlet is a device that I've been using the entire time. It's essentially a pulse ox that you put on the baby's foot that allows you to know if they are breathing or stop doing so. So it's a peace of mind device that I actually think is really interesting. And actually they've been doing really well as a company also. Also, not an investor, no bias.
And not to one up you, Kelly, but I had 2 babies during lockdown. I actually had twins. So I would like to say +1 to the Owlet.
Fantastic.
Wow, Joe, you've got quite an act to follow.
I certainly do. I can definitely start with I had no babies. Okay. My name is Joe Jason. I'm a director at a firm called DNA Partners. Why we call DNA Partners is because we're investing in the entrepreneurial spirit of the leadership's DNA. And our sector is hardware, software, and software services. So if we put an underlying value chain underneath them, digital media distribution, so how the digital media is distributed from the hardware to the software, and then the software services carry it. So that could be encoding, decoding in that realm. Our geographies are USA and China. Pre-COVID, I was spending the last 10 years about 30, 40, 50% of my time in China and a little bit in the Philippines and South Korea. My main domain background is the mobile wireless industry. I've worked for 2 mobile network operators, one in the US and one in South Korea. And so I kind of bring that, I just want the audience to know I bring that to the stage as more of the distribution of the electricity going through the air and how to distribute from hardware to software services. And I'll just call that solutions set. So when I say hardware, software services, let's just call that the solution set. I'll have a theme solution set modularity, modular, and ecosystems, not ecosystems necessarily like we think of them as Apple and Google, just a little bit more elaborate than that. Once again, Joe from DNA.
And what's your hardware?
Oh, my hardware, yes. So I'm going to go disconnected from the internet, and my Sony receiver, turntable, amplifier, 5.0 speakers. So I played a lot of records, vinyl records and discs. And I tried to listen to AM radio to figure out like what the USA was thinking in that realm as well. So I tried to go the full palette of media intake.
Wow, this is great. We all come from a similar place, but we have completely different hardware needs, which I think is pretty emblematic of this industry and of the needs of consumers in B2B. I am going to go ahead and kick off a question which I know is on a lot of people's minds. It's true that everyone is talking about how hot venture capital is right now and how hot the market is. There's lots of investors scrambling to deploy lots of capital, and it's supposedly easier than ever to go out and fundraise. Do you agree or disagree? And does this apply to hardware companies? In addition, if you can, please weigh in on the pros and cons of debt financing versus venture financing in the hardware space.
I'm sure Joe and Kelly, you'll have some very strong opinions on this too. At a high level, like, yeah, you know, VC is super frothy right now. Like a lot of investors really excited to deploy a lot of capital. So rounds are getting done and they're really competitive. Like they're getting like incredibly competitive. So yeah, there's a huge pro to if you're starting a company, if you're thinking about starting a company, if you have any kind of momentum at all and can tell a story, like, yeah, now is a good time to go out and raise, because the truth is like, I don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now or 9 months from now or 12 months from now. And I do know that things are really ripe right now. And it's easier than it ever has been since I started in venture a few years ago to get a round done. That being said, like, I also kind of want to like disagree with that statement a little bit and like counter my own argument in that there are a lot of people trying to take advantage of the fact that now is an easier time to raise. So there's a lot of noise, like a lot of noise. So if you're trying to take advantage of the time and go out to market right now, everyone else is doing the same thing. So it can be harder to get attention of the investors that you really want. And also there's always a risk that you can raise too much. Like if you raise too much too soon and your company is overcapitalized and then the market does crash or something does go wrong, then like it can be a lot harder to go out and raise your next round. Like the milestones that you have to hit are like that much higher if you raise 15 right now instead of 5 million, or if you raise 20 instead of 10, it's just going to be that much harder and take that much more effort to get to the next milestone. So I think that there are pros and cons to going out right now. I think it does still apply to hardware companies. I'm seeing hardware companies get rounds done now pretty quickly and in rounds that are getting very, very competitive. To answer the last bit of that question about like debt versus venture financing, I am a huge proponent of hardware companies as soon as they close an equity financing round with VC going out and taking on debt, especially if there's any kind of inventory that you're going to have to build up, if there's any kind of upfront cost that you're going to spend. VCs like funding the growth of the company. They're not super excited to actually fund the building of physical product, like the building up of inventory or the getting through mass production. So I'm a huge proponent of like doing both if you can.
Couldn't agree more. Kelly, can you weigh in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that this is definitely a topic. All of my portfolio companies are coming to me asking like, hey, you know, we weren't planning on raising for 3 months. Should we go ahead and do it now because the market's hot? So it's definitely something top of mind. What I would say is that instead of trying to think about where the market sits and what's going on, take a look and really try and understand what does each stage and round of fundraising mean and what are they looking for? And so really having an understanding of the market will answer your own question. So for instance, a pre-seed round, and I know that these words and terms are different everywhere across the United States. So I'm going to speak to what Silicon Valley B2B means. Okay. So a pre-seed round is a $1.5 to $2 million round generally. At that stage, what we love to see is a pilot. You don't have to have started the pilot, but we want to see you in talks with someone that you're about to go to market there. Around that, you can expect anywhere between an 8 and maybe even $15 million valuation, more or less depending on where you are, but it's a good ballpark to understand. A seed round is generally between $3 to $5 million raised. Valuations are anywhere between 15 and 20, 25 maybe. And there we really like to see around 500,000 ARR. That ARR doesn't actually have to be hitting your books. It just needs to be contract signed. And then for Series A rounds, where I'm seeing people close to $1 million hitting the actual books, actually that revenue coming in and your MRR matching that. So these are not hard and fast rules. I'm trying to just give you a high level understanding of how to look at the market. Understanding that tells you if you should be hitting the market or not. And traction really is king right now. As far as the debt that you were bringing up, I completely agree with absolutely everything that Chrissy said. The only thing that I would add is we are seeing, robotics and hardware products much, much cheaper than they used to be. So while you are thinking about debt financing and all these things, what should be ringing through your head over and over is that you really need to get your bill of materials as low as possible, because as hardware investors, we are expecting these bombs to be lower than ever before.
Kelly, I'm gonna push back on one thing.
Please do.
In terms of the stages, I think that was super true. Like even like 9 months ago. Right now, like things are insane in that like people are raising. I'm seeing people go out and raise Series A with $0. I mean, like I'm talking like $15 to $20 million Series A's with $0 in revenue. I think the times are just kind of chaos and kind of crazy in that Series A firms are now willing to invest on a team and a dream. Like that used to be like as seed stage investors, like that used to be our thing. It's like we invest on a team and a dream. Series A investors invest on metrics and revenue. Now I think that's shifted a little bit. I think things are crazy enough that Series A investors are now investing on team and a dream, which as seed investors, that makes our jobs even harder.
To that point, Chrissy, what would you recommend people thinking about in terms of their traction before they go out trying to raise that round?
I think if you have momentum and if you're a good storyteller, I think that like getting out to market and seeing what investors think, like I say, go for it. I say, like, if you can tell a good story and you have $0 in revenue, or you don't even have a working prototype, like now it's kind of unprecedented times. So like get out there and test the waters. And if you take a few meetings and you're getting no after no after no after no, like maybe you need to like go back and figure out what the right milestone is in terms of traction, revenue, pilots, or you need to rethink how you're telling your story because you're not, communicating it well.
Joe, what do you think?
I think I just hit Internet 1.0 euphoria here. I'm back in Silicon Valley. It's 1999. I agree that there is momentum and there is inertia in investing. I just want the rest of the nation or other parts of the world to be have a barometer that this is all primarily equity financing that we're talking about in the Silicon Valley area, or East Coast, West Coast, we could say. Maybe there's some Chicago and Austin in there, but I think it's a great time. I agree with the other panelists. There's a lot of momentum and inertia, as I stated. Also, there's an undercurrent of the USA government wanting manufacturers to start incubating. So each state is starting to get more organized, and they're trying to do grant programs and articulate and grow their ecosystems of manufacturing. So really take a look at that in your own state and your own city that you're in as well. And then you could consider debt financing versus equity financing there. I would just want to say one more caveat on debt financing is, it seems like a hard reach. I think anywhere in the world in the last 20 years. But in China, it's pretty commonplace for the manufacturers to invest in a startup company, and then they reel in that startup company inside of their manufacturing plant, and then that is primarily debt equity that they're taking in that situation. So if you look at Shenzhen and Shanghai and Singapore and South Korea, Taiwan, they're definitely want to invest in from a government standpoint or from a manufacturer's plant into a startup company. So just a different perspective. That's all I'm trying to share.
Thank you, Joe. And I want to go back to something that Chrissy led off with about the noise that is around right now. If you are pitching, especially if you have a deck, get your deck in good order. I have found it's a big part of my day job is to review hundreds of decks. You live and die by the clarity of your deck. So do invest the time in that and even potentially some money. I am going to move on to my next question. The past year has been anomalous in so many ways. Consumer and B2B habits have changed, at least in the short term, in a big way. Can you talk a little about how the hardware winners and losers for the pandemic and what the return to the new normal for hardware might just look like?
A winner is a wristwatch. If we call that in the IoT or wearables department, the watches, the Fitbits, and the equivalent like that in the consumer realm has started to have some uptick in sales. And Google purchased Fitbit. I don't know if that was 2019 or 2020, but Samsung is starting to take it much more seriously than they have in the past. They actually just dropped their own OS called Tizen, and now they have formally committed to Google's wearable or Wear OS. I think in that category where USA citizens went out and exercised and wanted to keep track of their heart rate and their diet, I think that was a bit of an uptick in that realm.
Yeah, we have not done any wearable investments, and I don't think we ever will. I think it's a result of like me being jaded. I spent too much time working on the Apple Watch, and I think kind of like burned me a little bit. No doubt, home fitness has been like hugely successful in the pandemic. Like Peloton, Tonal, Mirror, like those companies are doing amazingly well. And I continuously get hit with their paid ads on social. Also, anyone making like AV equipment, I want to see Logitech's sell-through numbers. I'm super curious, but like so many people are out trying to like pimp out their home office the moment the pandemic hit. And then like personal care. So like Madison Reed type, like direct to consumer hair color, like things that people, have not been able to like go out and do that they used to. Like we've got a portfolio company launching pretty soon that has been working on a nail care product. Any kind of personal care things that people used to do out in the past, now they're doing at home. Robotics has been wildly successful. Like industry suffered such a massive like shock to its system and such like a big disruption that all of a sudden these like big companies that historically weren't really at the forefront of like innovation now are like scrambling to figure out how to, solve labor issues and keep people 6 feet apart and improve their operational efficiency. So like how that they all of a sudden overnight allocated money to go off and spend on like figuring out what robotic solutions might be able to help them out. So I think we've seen a huge acceleration in robotics just in the past year.
Yeah. So I think that it's really interesting. Something that I focus a lot on traditional industry, and something that I've learned over the years with traditional industry is that they tend to not adopt technology until their hand is forced. And one of the things that we've been seeing forcing their hand, even over the past few years, even before COVID, was labor shortages. And so that was where we really saw even construction. I know probably a lot of people saw Canvas, the drywaller announcement that's in our portfolio, harvesting of fruits, things like that. Those were the original labor shortages that we were seeing robotics really stick their teeth into a few years ago. To Chrissy's point, exactly. When COVID hit, we started seeing a ton of older industries needing to find a way to solve this new problem of labor that had been lurking in the background, but really hadn't reared its ugly head yet. So in particular, we have seen anybody who is able to entirely replace a job that has a labor shortage, they've really been taking off. The things that we see taking off actually less are more horizontal plays where you can take small pieces of a bunch of different jobs. That's been something that we haven't been seen taking off, at least from my perspective, that we haven't seen taking off as fast in this moment.
Can we talk about hardware losers for pandemic losers for?
Yes, absolutely.
I almost think it's a little bit more fun to talk about that than even the winners. Like, I just feel so sorry for anyone working on micromobility and shared anything, because the past year has been really tough, and like anything touching automotive, like obviously like nobody was going anywhere, nobody was driving, but these industries, not only did they get hit super hard when the pandemic hit, now we should be starting to see a rebound and we should be starting to see them like take off, but everybody's being like super crippled by the global chip shortage. So these companies that you would expect to be bouncing back right now literally cannot produce product because they cannot get chips in hands. So it's like the double whammy. It's tough times for those industries.
Well, and I think that it's really interesting to think about too, like some people were so crippled by it and some people figured out a way to survive. So for instance, we're in Dishcraft, which was a corporate dishwashing robot. Okay. So there is no use for them when all the corporations are closed. And we had this moment in time where we were saying, okay, what are we going to do about this company? And they did this amazing job pivoting, bringing on an entirely new product line of reusables so that people could take things back to their desks, so that restaurants had reusables that they could send home. So they took this moment of sustainability and this moment where their entire market was decimated and really married it into actually a way to take off. And so I think that we are seeing, to Chrissy's exact point, I think we are seeing this moment of a lot of companies were affected in such a way that they could have just collapsed. And we saw quite a few of them do that. And then we saw a few pivot into what I like to call a crisis tunity. And figure out how to actually really make something of this and become bigger than I think they would have even been without the crisis.
I want to do the next panel and call it crisis tunity. That is
good idea.
We're getting close to the end, but there's a really long three-parter question I have that feel free to pick up and touch any way you want. I'm going to go in reverse order. Joe, and then Kelly, and then Chrissy. So the pandemic has created a disruption in the global supply chain, including a chip shortage. How is this impacting hardware companies, big and small? What have you seen personally within your own portfolio? And is this shaping your own investment thesis or how you think about new investments or supporting existing companies in your portfolio? Joe, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. It doesn't impact me and DNA Partners that significantly. And I think there's a little bit of hyperbolics to it, like 1977 gasoline industry, where it's like, you withhold a little bit to bring the economics forward. I also think it's a time for other nations then to step up and really fine tune their intellect on semiconductors, which in the short term is not good for the United States, but in the long term, it's great for everyone to have a more refined solution set of products, whether it's system on a chip or the actual just hardware of the chip, and then the actual manufacturing of where is that being done, and sharing supply chains and being more comfortable with security around it, or having more stringent parameters, making parameters around security, and then allocating or parlaying that into privacy and associated geographic regions with that. But overall, in our portfolio or our prospective portfolio, it doesn't affect us. I think right now, and I'm partly being just optimistic because I think it's going to be, the shortage will be accelerated in a shorter amount of time than what the CEOs out there have been saying of their own companies.
I think a lot of it will probably depend on the stage of your portfolio companies. So my portfolio companies, because I tend to invest in pre-seed, Many of them were kind of right at that inflection moment where they had gotten a whole bunch of contracts in, and all of their customers are saying, how fast can you deploy a bunch of robots? And so for us, it was a really hard time trying to figure out what is that solution there. And, I love talking to my CEOs that are these really aggressive, awesome CEOs talking about like their little like hoarding behavior around chips. But I think to your point, listen, it's not crippling the industry. It's not like people are surviving, people are able to deploy. I do think that we're seeing a slower deployment and a more cautious deployment because people aren't operating under the assumption that they can deploy as fast as they used to be able to. And to your point, I do think there is fear around it.
I'm probably going to be a little bit more like overly dramatic than both of you guys, but like I think it's really bad. I know that like our startups, some of them are being hit pretty hard. I can't even tell you the number of founders both within our portfolio and outside of our portfolio that have like personally reached out to me and said, what do I do? Like, I can't find chips anywhere. I just need 500 or I just need 200. And like, I literally can't get it. I have founders that have asked me if it was okay to buy a reel of components off of eBay. That to me is like next level horrifying of like the idea of people buying parts off eBay because they can't get them through standard channels. I think it is really severe, and I think it's impacting companies big and small. But especially if you're on the smaller side, you think it should be easy to get a couple hundred chips or 500 chips or something like that to get your first prototypes built and tested. But the reality is, all the big companies have all the leverage. They're the ones eating up all the allocation. So like if TI is having to choose between giving 200 chips to you or giving it to Apple, like they're giving it to Apple, right? It's hard. My advice to companies is place your orders early. Don't believe any lead times that are quoted. Like all of the quoted lead times right now are bogus. Like, but sometimes it might be longer, sometimes it might be shorter, but like they're pretty much bogus. And then get creative about prototyping. I know, we invested in a company called Particle, which hopefully some people in the audience are familiar with it, but like use platforms like Particle to build your product and build your prototypes if you can, because, trying to build your own custom boards right now can be really difficult if you can't get parts. And Particle has enough volume that they have leverage and can secure allocation. So you as an early stage startup might not. So it's just something to consider.
I hate to break in, Chrissy, because what you're saying is so interesting. I could literally be here all day. The good news is we're going to have a Q&A session after this, which I encourage everyone to join. And there will be office hours scheduled. Not because it's my panel. And by the way, sorry about the lawnmowers. Everyone's decided to mow their lawn in Marin. But this has been one of the best panels I've been on and seen in a long time. So thank you so much for including me. So we're going to say goodbye, but we will see you all at the Q&A and at the breakout session.
Thank you for having us. Thanks, Lila.
Thanks.